Okay, this is my fourth video trying to do this. I keep confusing myself because I took crappy notes and I didn't write it down to be making a video and talking about it. So I got like footnotes on footnotes and all that stuff. So this is part of my upper end, top end build. I have a gasket that I ripped. The base gasket. There's a spot there, spot there, spot there. I'm just going to have somebody make me a copper gasket and be done with it. That's like the third one I ripped. I don't trust them paper gaskets with this crankcase pressure blowing it out. I don't want oil all over the place. So it's going to be a couple weeks before I, put the actual top end on the crank case and on the engine. So that will be another time. But this video, I'm going to try to talk about cam timing and ignition timing. They are two different things. Cam timing is where your exhaust and intake valves open at different times. You can advance it to open up earlier, and you can retard it to have it open up later. Ignition timing, advancing it, will give you spark earlier before top dead, and then retarding it will ignite it later. And there's some things that it does that you don't want it to do, advancing and retarding. So we'll talk about cam timing. Intake closes earlier, and what that does is it traps more air and fuel. What it affects. Advancing it affects low speed. At low speed, you get better low end torque. So then you lose top end torque or horsepower at the top of the RPM range. So by doing that, by advancing it, by opening the intake and exhaust, you can move the horsepower past the peak horsepower range. So if I can explain this right, let's just use this scenario here. Like, let's say stock without doing anything, your highest RPM range is at 5,000 RPMs. Let's say you get 10 horsepower at 5,000 RPMs. Now if we advance that and move that to like 10 horsepower at 4,000 RPMs, you'll get more torque, you'll get more horsepower, ramp up faster. But then as you get up to the higher RPMs, around 5,000, your horsepower is already at its maximum at 4,000. So you're moving 1,000 RPMs past. So what happens is you get float. You get float in your valves and stuff like that at the higher RPMs. You kind of like plateau. Some people call it like standing on its nose. So unless you have different gears, you can't accelerate as quick. You kind of run out of horsepower unless, like you port your heads. You have a header that can gain you more horsepower. Let's say you put an aftermarket exhaust on it, open headers, hotter spark, an air cleaner, a jet. So then you got more horsepower. Let's say you start off with 10 horsepower. You add carburetor jetting, an intake, an exhaust, and a spark system. So, like hotter coils, better spark plugs. So let's say you just got like 3 horsepower because you did all that. So now you're at 13 horsepower. So that gives your RPM range at the top end more horsepower. So you got 3 more horsepower. So you can go a little faster. And it's kind of like the theory of cars. So if you want to advance that and get that quicker, So you want more horsepower. So it'll go a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, and your higher RPM range will go a little higher. And there's two different ways. Like single, like a if you get like exhaust, you got dual exhaust, and they're open, like basically drag headers or whatever. That's low end torque. You sacrifice high end torque for that. Kind of like short tube headers. Now you go with 2-into-1, creates higher end horsepower. So there's a lot of factors in where you want to find your timing at with cam timing. So what you need to do is figure out, do you want to go to low end horsepower or high end horsepower? High end horsepower is retarding it. So that means that your intake closes late. Gives your fuel and air more time to enter at high RPMs. This is where you lose low end horsepower and you get top end horsepower. So let's say you at the start, like let's say you're drag racing. At the start, you get going. It's like that, and it's kind of sluggish. But then as soon as you hit, like let's say scenario, your 5,000 RPM range. Your 5,000 RPM range is now you moved it up. So like 5,500 or let's say 6,000. So now when you get up to 6,000, your cam is advanced and the air and fuel mixture is flowing a lot better. If you got good flowing heads, and when you get up to high RPMs, when air and fuel mix, it gets denser. So it's hard to keep that. It's hard not to keep it flowing. So the better your heads flow, the better your exhaust flow, the more power you'll make. If you have like a header with it, that just makes more horsepower at the top end. So let's say low end you want to get snappy right off, blah 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 blah, blah blah, beat shit stop sign to stop sign. That's always fun. But then let's say you're racing another rebel and he doesn't get you off the line, and as soon as you hit your plateau, because you're advanced and he's not, he'll blow by you at a certain point. Depending on what you got done with your engine. If you have a stock Rebel that's not done anything to it, and then you have a Rebel that has something done to it, like advance the timing, and you got like, let's say, like I said, air cleaner and carb and all that stuff, and you're kind of hopped up a little bit, there's a give and take there. You got more of a power band. So, sometimes when you see cars racing, they'll be like pulling like this, and all of a sudden you hit another RPM, and they'll just be nose and nose. So that affects it. So retarding the cam affects the low RPM torque and horsepower, and it affects the higher end horsepower. So you'll get slow start, less power, but more fuel, better combustion power at higher RPMs. Meaning, if you get, it's like anything, more air and more fuel you can get at it, the bigger the combustion from the compression, the more power it feeds out. So you're getting more horsepower. Anytime you add more fuel and more air, and if it's mixed right, you get more horsepower. So you can get more horsepower advancing it or retarding it. You just got to find out where your sweet spot is. So you don't have to adjust your ignition timing. You can leave your ignition timing fine and degree the cam, advance it or retard it. That won't affect anything. All's timings, spark timing is when it sparks. And you got to sync the cam timing up with your ignition timing. Your ignition timing, top dead or before top dead or after top dead. Your stock is set at like 5 degrees or whatever vehicle you're running. With the Rebel, it's Full advance is 35 degrees at like 3,500 RPM, and your initial timing is at 5 degrees timing. So what your ignition timing does is tell you when it's going to spark. And if you look on your, I'll go get it and I'll show you. So if you look on your flywheel, you'll have right there your little pickup. That's your pickup, and what your pulse generator does is when this spins, it picks up on this. This is where the keyway in here is set on your crank. So that's one position. So this is fixed. This is a fixed spot. It's not like you can adjust it or anything like that. Or with the cam gears and stuff in cars, you can adjust the cam timing on that. And your crank has to always be timed the correct firing order. That's why you got tap dead center. But if you use indicator dial and do all that yada yada, and that's a different thing. But back to what I'm saying is, when it goes, it fires. And then when you take off your stator thing, there's a pulse generator. That's fixed. So on the Rebels, this is fixed timing. So you really want to degree your cam and not worry about your advancing your timing. If you want to advance your ignition timing, what you need to do is get like a, and I showed it before, it's, you know, your CDI. If you have a stock CDI and you advance your cam, that will affect, because you have a limiter on your firing. So let's say you advance your timing with your cam, and then you have the stock CDI ignition. So when you get up to the higher RPMs, it's not going to fire good. So that's another thing you got to watch out for. And my best thing to say is read articles. The more you frickin' read, the more you'll understand this stuff. And I'm learning how to understand this stuff. So you don't have to advance your ignition timing if you have your cam timing advanced or retarded. If you can figure out a way to advance your ignition spark and time it with your cam timing, then you can find a sweet spot, and that's when your fuel's at the most efficient level. You always want your fuel and mixture 100%. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but especially at higher RPMs, the more efficient it combusts at 100%, the more power you'll make, because you don't want unburnt fuel. That's carbon and smoking and not being efficient. If you advance your timing and stuff like that, you get it runs hotter, or it runs cooler, it combusts in the cylinder, you can lose pressure, which is lost power. If you retard it too much, you'll get ignition ping, which is knocking, and you don't want that. If you retard it too much, you can, it gets really freaking hot. So if you ever, I did this once before where I put 106 octane in 97 octane gas, and I rolled it around, and it was fast. No timing done. It was fast. I got 106 miles an hour out of it, but it ran hot. The hotter you want it, you want it to run hot and explode, but you don't want to burn valves out. You can warp shit, get hot, you burn out valves, you can crack your head and stuff and warp. So that's a lot of stuff to figure out. But basically for these Rebels, you want to degree the cam. And I suggest you watch some videos on how people degree cams. You can retard it or advance it. With what I want to do is I want the higher end horsepower. So I want to retard the cam. So it's going to be sluggish, off the line. The air and fuel is not going to be that efficient, but you want to spark it as hot, like hotter the coils, spark whatever gas you can get in there. And then at the higher RPMs, you know, I'm going to have a turbo on there, or if you have a header on there, it flows better. As soon as you, if you hog out your like intake and you hog out your exhaust on your heads, as soon as it gets a higher, flows faster. You always want it to flow low RPMs or high RPMs. High RPMs, you want it to flow faster. Get that fuel in there, spark it, get rid of it. That's efficient, especially if you have, you know, your gas and air mixture right. That's why I have a wideband controller. So if you got that right, it's mixing right, it's atomizing right, you get a hot spark in there, and you produce power. Advancing and degreeing the cam changes your power band. So wherever you put it, you're going to sacrifice where it's at. But if you can find the sweet spot, like timing lights, always good for it. If you can find somebody with a dyno, it's always nice to know where it's at. The more you invest in learning how it works, the better it's going to run. That's like anything else. So that were my things on advancing and timing and ignition timing. So I hope that kind of explains something. Sorry I don't have like a little project to show you what I'm doing, but eventually I'll get there and show you how to do it. So, all right, thanks for listening to me ramble, and hopefully you can take away some things to think about advancing the cam and how to do that, and combustion and how that works, and how to degree in the cam and find top dead center, and it's always good to have the right tools, and it's always good to first of all get one of these. I wouldn't know where to begin or how things are tolerated or torque. If you're going to tear something apart, get a Honda service manual or a manual of what you need. So, all right. Thanks, YouTube.